Okay.
Created by the gods that
Stop streaming.
would be part of.
That was the weaver or the spinner of destiny. And this is important to understand because the fair folk and the fairy people and the fates are all connected in this mythology as the ones who control the fates and the destinies. More the fates as opposed to a destiny, which is free choice, which you have to choose, and the fate is a predetermined end no matter what you do. There is a nuance there. I won't go into the nuances of it, but they are distinct. And so these spider goddesses were part of the trickster spirits of the gods. And there's a whole section of trickster spirits as well as trickster spirit, demon spirits as well. That's in the shaman and that sort of mythos. So she's kind of an equivalent to Ishtar in Arachne. And Arachne is probably the best one to focus on in this question as it relates to offspring and giants. So Arachne actually means spider, and she was transformed into a spider by Athena, and she was known also as a weaver who made purple garments for the gods. And so the two types of garments that were very prized with the gods were the purple garments of Arachne and also the golden fleece that was spun on the same type of invention that whether it's Arachne or Ishtar or Neith had invented, because they're the ones who invented the spindle loom of the gods that would have been passed down in a transference of technology to the offspring and to humans. And so purple is sort of the color of the royals because they're the divine representatives on earth of the gods, and they're the ones of majesty, which also goes back to royal and back to the color of purple, and everything's sort of tied into all of those different meanings. And we also get these Nazca lines that represent spiders. They have a spider image amongst those figurines amongst the lines in South America. So now Arachne was a shepherd's daughter. So this is kind of an odd language because typically the shepherds in Greek mythology would be associated with the Cyclops, which is another type of spurious offspring and giant. And also the Hyksos were related as the shepherd kings and sort of the fisher kings and a combination of the royale, of the governorship, and the religious sort of aspect that goes with it. And they were thought to have healing powers. And she was the daughter of an individual named Idmon, meaning having knowledge. And Idmon was the son of Apollo or Abbas. So one wonders whether or not Arachne is actually a goddess or a demigod in this, because she's either offspring god of an offspring god or a demigod. But either way is kind of transformed into a spider, just as Zeus transformed King Lycan into a werewolf or a wolf. So along the same kind of allegory and imagery that is ongoing here, and it's hard to tell whether or not Arachne would have been a female giant, just as Lycan was a male giant of the heroes of the earthly titans. So, but typically she's equated with a goddess. So if she had some sort of offspring, then you could see that nature being passed on, just as Lycan and his whole family, as they had offspring, they produced tribes of werewolves in that mythology. So sort of akin to that. And we get another reference to a possible type of being or a type of Nephilim or some sort of something in between in terms of the characteristics of what a spider Nephilim might look like, sort of akin to what the scorpion beings are, the Urmalu, not the Urmalu, those are the lion gods, but the Girdabalu and the Akrabamalu in Sumeria. So if you haven't seen those, you could look at those as either demigods or gods. I think more gods with the scorpion gods, and the same ones that come out of Revelation 9 in the end times. So in the Lord of the Rings, you've got a fellow scorpion gods, and the same ones that come out of Revelation 9. I think we have some feedback going on there. We have Shilob. That's okay.
Continue.
I just waited for myself to stop talking.
No,
so
amazing information. Oh, continue. You're continuing.
So Shilob in The Lord of the Rings, and understand Tolkien's writing about antediluvian history, and he's got all sorts of beings that were there that were created, including the noble Celt, which would have been the elves, the white elves as they're depicted, like the Tuatha De Danann, only a shrunken version versus their actual size. So you've got Shilob, who is a spider monster that is in The Lord of the Rings, and he lived in a place called Surit Ungol, and it means the pass of the spider. So probably somewhere in the mountains, just as you have in the Bible, you have the passway of the scorpion gods in the Old Testament, or the passway of the scorpions in the Old Testament. So again, sort of following that same sort of analogy, only in this form of mythopoeic writing versus perhaps some of the Ovidi's versions of the same type of history. So you have this being that is thought to be from before the world was created. So again, that kind of creates it to angelic status, just as the fallen angels, before they rebelled, they were part of the angels created in Psalms 104 before the physical world was created, as in the earth. And just as they're talked about in Job's 38, 4-7, the sons of God and morning stars as angels dancing for joy and singing for joy at creation. So that's how that mythos sort of goes back, and but not just as a immortal spirit, but an evil spirit, and that took the form of a spider. So one deduces spirit being angel, fallen angel, physical world takes a physical likeness to what it would be in a spiritual form, but in the physical format. And so again, from that physical format, again, if she procreated with human males, would have created spider-like Nephilim. And that she's considered like a Maya spirit, Maia, which means an immortal spirit. So she's thought to be part of in another line, she's thought to be part of the female giants of destiny and the fair folk. So I think what we have is we have a combination of both a fallen angel and a demigod that was also producing offspring from herself and whatever other partners that she would have taken on. So again, it's connecting a lot of dots. Nothing that firm that I've ever found about that says there were spider-like Nephilim, but we get spiders all through occult history, and it's interconnected in allegories with the spider web and making of the web, and it's like the golden fleece as you're creating the material on the looms to make the clothing and whatever else. So it's interesting. So, but I can't say that I have a smoking gun verse anywhere within my research of polytheist prehistory or biblical prehistory.
Wow, Gary, I'm so blown away just by this one question. You have such a huge variety of knowledge and different amazing links to this with spiders. Who would have known? And you know, when you brought up the formation or the gigantic drawings in Peru and Chile as well, I believe I've actually seen those when we went to Peru, and you can't do it justice unless it's aerial, you know. So it was definitely made for some of their, I'm thinking they're flying ships or something that they had in the past, and who knows what it was for, right? I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking maybe it's like marking a landing strip or something simple, but I'm sure there's a lot more to it, right? Okay, you ready for the next question, Gary? And it looks like we got the sound all going. Everything is good. Everyone, thank you so much, everyone, for all your patience. Everyone came over from the first YouTube broadcast that we were doing, and they started a brand new one, and the sound is all awesome. So we're all set here for the next question. This is from Ari, and the question is, what does Gary think the IQ of the fallen might be?
Well, I guess it all depends on what your definition of the fallen are. Is it the fallen angels, as in the Nephilim, the fallen ones, the Shemaim, or is it the fallen, as they're also called, as the Nephilim or the Rephaim? So we don't know how high the IQ was. I'll start with the demigods, with the Nephilim and the Rephaim. We don't know how high their original IQ might have been when they were first generation, and none of their gifts were, let's say, diluted through the generations and outside intermarriage. But today, when we have surveys done on people who have Rh negative blood that would come from a specific gene, they have a lot of traits, and one of them is an IQ intelligence of 135 and higher. And so I won't go through all of the traits. It's an IQ question. So one presumes that as you get further back, that the gift would be even higher than that. And they also had the ability to have like a hive mind. That's not in the in the surveys, but they believe in the hive mind, and they want to recreate that hive mind. And we're getting science that's working on the brain interlink. And then at the Davos meeting in January, they were talking about in 10 years they're going to have interlinks between brains that you can have and talk like a counterfeit sort of telepathy. So they want to recreate that hive mind because it's part of their old system. So I think they would have been way smarter than what we give credit to for when they were first created. And just as I think that humans are just as smart today as we were before, but we don't have that dilution of the bloodlines and the loss of that counterfeit gift. They would have. So I think they might have been very, very smart, and they would have had to have been quite smart to work with the angelic technology as well. So it's just my speculation. So I have no idea how high that goes. But if you're talking about the fallen angels, well, I mean, the only thing that could limit their IQ in the physical world would be some sort of limitation for the brain that they created for themselves for the spirit to operate. Wouldn't be able to hold or pass on all of their knowledge. I think they had incredible knowledge, and only limited to maybe what their position was in the hierarchy of the angels. And of course, underneath what the tripart nature of God knows. And even in that, the Father, Abba El Elyon, the God Most High, Well, is the only one who knows the time, exact timing when Jesus will come. Not even Jesus knows that. So there's a hierarchy to the knowledge and hierarchy to the IQ, I think. So unlimited on the spiritual end. I have no idea how you would quantify that, but obviously there are parameters in terms of how high you go up in the hierarchy, and obviously everything below the tripart nature is less than the tripart nature.
It's kind of hard to put our human IQ with fallen angels or any type of angels, actually, with the spiritual beings. It kind of reminded me when you were speaking about, when you were talking about the hierarchy and how it seems like, especially with evidence in the book of Enoch, that the angels that are closer to the seventh heaven, or especially like the archangels, they're all in different classes. The ones that came on Mount Hermon, I remember in the book of Enoch, the Most High was saying the secrets that you shared were worthless. Basically, and they weren't even that like amazing compared to what I'm sure the angels in the sixth or seventh heaven have. I'm not sure if you agree with that, but that was kind of my take on it. Reminded me when you were speaking, Gary.
Well, yeah, and also they would be afraid as to how much knowledge that they would provide the Nephilim, their offspring, and humans, because they wouldn't want that turned against them.
Yes. Oh, for sure.
And then I also put in the other benchmark is in terms of the scale of how big that you're going into the spiritual realm and through the hierarchies, is that even though Satan says he's all knowing, he's not. And that's not a number you can measure as being all knowing. But God, the omnipotent one, is all knowing. And that is, again, not measurable. It's just so how do you put the angels on a scale on that? It would be high, but we have no ability to, I think, measure it in terms of our intelligence level.
Exactly. How do you quantify the IQ of the Most High when he's the one that created it, right? So definitely great answer, Gary, as usual. Thank you so much. Let's move on to the next question. This is from Brian Tucker, and I see Brian in the chat here. He is asking, will the Rephaim be reincarnated during the tribulation? Gary? Brother Gary, you still there? For some reason I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there we go. Oh, I heard you for a bit there.
Can you hear me now?
There, I can hear you now. Perfect.
Okay, don't know why. We're having gremlins tonight.
I told everyone in the internet. Chat. I know. I told everyone in the chat, please be in prayer. There's some issues going on with sound and who knows what. But yeah, I can hear you fine now. So do you want me to ask the question again?
No, I heard the question clearly. And so I would say no, but it's a qualified no, that it won't be reincarnation as they have deceived us in that reincarnation sort of belief that is a evolution to sort of godhood. Well, they were created as demigods. They'll kind of want to get back to that level of demigodness, and in the physical world where their bodies weren't limited to life, just as Genesis 6:3 in the creation of the giants limited life to 120 years, both human and the bodies of giants. And so they've been trying to find a way to create those oicatarians, or dwelling places for the spirit, to bring those disembodied spirits back, because they're not permitted to sleep. They're not permitted into heaven. They're only going to be in 3 places if they're fortunate enough through the rituals and sort of a natural sort of death. They believe they could be paraded into the underworld where their gods are, which is their heaven. That would be their ideal position, but they're just bodiless demonic spirits. You have the disembodied spirits that Jesus was dealing with, the daemons, which is the Greek word for devils, and the equivalent to unclean spirits and evil spirits, used interchangeably in those passages when Jesus is talking about these demon spirits. And they're like in dry places, and they need a place to rest. So the only way they can interact in the physical world is possess a human in a possession act that would suppress the host, so that they could have rest and they could interact in the physical world. So the other place is in the pit prison, in the sides of the pit prison, as Ezekiel 32 talks about. So will we see these demon spirits back in the end time in ways we haven't really seen them? I think so. But it will be through a counterfeit reincarnation to build, and through technology and advancement of science, clone bodies, transhuman bodies. Imagine them as the riders on the chimera type of beasts in Revelation 9 and the 200 million man army after the abyss pit prison has been opened. Oicatarians like that they would have be able to interact physically. Also in Daniel 9:243, when it's talking about these descendants of the Iron Empire, which descends from all of the metallic empires through Babylon and beyond, they're going to intermingle and commingle with the seed of humans. And so they could be recreated through those clone type of bodies and then become the kings, or they could possess. You could also translate that in Hebrew that you make a case for that they would be possessing these 10 kings of the seventh empire, and that they would be commingling with the human seed at that time as well. So that is a possibility to happen, or they may just have ones that are saved in stasis somehow, some way, and if not in stasis and or in stasis in another dimension, like in Sheol or Hades, off the world, in the world, however, that they bring them back, that they will represent them as reincarnated creatures. But that's really the only avenues that I see. And I think we see the application of these beings taking bodily form somehow in not only Revelation 9, but Joel 1 and 2, and Ezekiel 38 and 39 in the Gog War, noting Gog is the giant son of Iapetus, a parent god before the flood. And Magog is also one of those giants. And so I think those names are there to lead us in a direction of searching out the giants both before and after the flood and understanding all of that. So, yeah, I think there's that possibility that they'll come back in that way. It'll be deceptively sold as to what they are, who they are, and how they got there. And some of them will be as I think, as Brian is asking, is possibly a reincarnation, but again, that would be a counterfeit. And just to plug for my new book in Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2, as I get into the prophetic side, I actually put a column up of the description of those creatures in the 200 million man army in Revelation 9, and then give the Joel 1 and 2 equivalents to show you that that's the same creatures and the same war. And I think it's absolutely eye-opening. And I showed that and a comparative of the Krababalu and the scorpion gods in Revelation 9 and out of polytheist prehistory, and it's just shocking at the identical descriptions in both of those, and you get those in the new book. Also showed them at the conference last May.
Yes, I remember that, Gary. I was just going to comment on that, and thank you again for your extremely amazing answer to this question. I think it's going to be very exciting times as we get closer to the tribulation, just to see how all of this unfolds. So on that note, let's go on to the next question. This is from Daniel Sullivan. And yes, Daniel, I see you in the chat. And he's asking some other questions as well that we might not be able to get to the next show. But this is his question from last month. And this is, please connect the beasts of Isaiah 13, verse 21 to 22 to the end times. Are the beasts of the islands and dragons in pleasant palaces, the 10 Nephilim kingdoms of Babylon and Atlantis? So it sounds like it's actually kind of like two parts of this question, Gary.
Yeah, it is. And it's a big question, but it's a great question. And understanding Isaiah 13 and 14 is one of those things that once you get how that prophecy works, it leads you to understand other prophecies. And I call this a dual prophecy. And Isaiah 13 and 14 is the same prophecy. It's separated by man-made chapter insertions that never used to be there, but it's the same prophecy. And if you read it that way, it starts to make a whole lot more sense. And so this is an end-time prophecy And it's also related to Isaiah 34 as an end time prophecy as well. And so once you understand that both of those are end time prophecies as well as a dual prophecy, then you'll notice the creatures in there are kind of similar. So let's just sort of walk through what I'm talking about. So Isaiah 13 is before Antichrist comes to power, but Antichrist is the allegorical king of Babylon in Isaiah 13 and 14, and Hel-El as in H-E-L-E-L, which is a derivative off of Hail-El for Satan in Isaiah 14:12, H-E-Y-L-E-L. But Hel-El for Antichrist, Babylon, an allegory for the king of Babylon as it's defined, does not show up in the Old Testament, but the king of Babylon does. And so part of the Antichrist allegories that are used in prehistory are king of Babylon, Babel king, and also the Assyrian. And there are more, but just to keep it tight for this one, because it's a big explanation. And that Isaiah 13 is the time and the rise of Antichrist, and then Isaiah 14 is more of a dual prophecy for the last 3.5 years. So what's a dual prophecy? A dual prophecy is for the time of the prophet, so in this case Isaiah, that in this case the Assyrian Empire is going to be reflected. And of course, out of the Assyrian Empire, Babylon's going to rise. And that'll be, come to full power in the time of Jeremiah, who covers a lot of the Babylon prophecies. But Babylon is mentioned in both Isaiah 13 and 14. So it has prophecies not fulfilled in the time of the prophet, but will fit the end time in its degree and or event that may not even happen at all, or as it applies to Antichrist and or as it applies to Satan and to fallen angels. So it also has important information in these unique prophecies about prehistory. So in this case, we're going to learn about Satan in Isaiah 14 as it connects through, and his attempt to storm heaven, just as Antichrist will do in the end time. So once we have that sort of quickly understood, I know this is a lot of information and I'll be moving fairly quickly on this, we can start to sort of look at it. So let's look at Isaiah 13:1. This is the burden of Babylon, and it's also talking about that happening on a high mountain. So keep the mountain in mind for prehistory as in terms of Mount Hermon, what its importance would have been in the time of the prophet, and that look for Armageddon to be fought around Mount Hermon in the end time. And in verse 2, it's talking about the holy ones that are sanctified ones, and the mighty ones are going to be working for God in the time of anger, and these are the ones who rejoice in God. So some people think that this is these are giants. They're not. If you look through the Hebrew of it, is that these are the holy ones of God as in angels. So when it's got the mighty ones, that is Gabor, but Gabor can also be used to describe the strength of God, the strength of angels, and other words as well, like excel, noble. So you have to be careful of the applications, but these mighty ones are what we would understand in the New Testament as the mighty angels that are talked about. And these are angels that are very, very powerful in the hierarchy of angels. And we get two classifications, and they may be talking about the same one, or there's a higher level of the mighties. So in these mighty ones, you get Dunamis as part of those angels that are called the mighties, and also Icarus, which is the ones used in the book of Revelation. In the book of Revelation, in the end time, Icarus, the mighty angels, are loyal angels that are helping disperse some of the things that are going to happen in the end time. And it's in the time of the anger, and that's the Hebrew word af, which is the time of the wrath. It's one of those used words also translated as wrath in the Old Testament. And in the new book, I'll cover off the definitions for and where they're used for wrath and other applications, just so that people can sort of track that, because you don't get all of that in most of the Bibles that you read. And so these are the great people in the mountains, right? So that are going to be active in the end time. So as you move through to verse 5, I'm just trying to set the table for the end time. This is telling us that the day of the Lord is at hand, like in Joel 1 and 2, as in Revelation 9 war, as in Ezekiel 38 and 39, but it's not Armageddon yet. But it will come as destruction comes from the Almighty, which is Shaddai, as in El Elyon. So this is sometime in the end time, but it is not Armageddon. So, and there's two events, and that's why you have Isaiah 34 and you have the prophecy of Isaiah 13 and 14. And so it is like the fulfillment of the birth pangs that begin to take hold. So it's after the sorrows, after they started, and we're into the last 7 years of this, but just before the midpoint of the 7 years that leads to this burden of Babylon and the destruction. And so it goes on in verses 8 and 9 about these birth pangs that, behold, there is a day of the Lord that cometh, and a day of wrath, and it's the year of recompense as well, as it gets into the year of the Lord for Armageddon. But it has not come yet. It's coming. But this is a destruction before the day of the Lord. And as you move through into verse 10, you've got stars and light not being shone. And this is what is being talked about in Matthew 24 when it's talking about the powers of heaven being shaken. This is the start of that, the opening of the abyss and what's going on the earth. And that's the word dunamis. That's the mighty ones that are being shaken in heaven, and there's mighty ones on both sides. And it also is Revelation 8 in the fourth trumpet. So it's coming in on, but before the abomination and the time of the seventh trumpet. So you get a timing there. And in verses 11 through 17, then afterward the world will be punished. That's the great tribulation that it's referencing going forward after this destruction. And that's Matthew 24:21, the great tribulation. And Mark 13:19 is the great affliction. Same Hebrew word, thalipses, same as the affliction used in Matthew 24:7 for the affliction or the tribulation of the saints that's taking place in the first 3.5 years. And so this is a time when the proud and the terrible ones are starting to be punished. In Isaiah 25, Isaiah 21, or Psalms 21:8, time of the wrath, that they'll eventually all be punished in around that holy mountain, the holy mountain of the fallen angels. And these are the terrible ones, or the Eretes, and those are the ones that are talking to Pharaoh from the pit prison to another terrible one, the Pharaoh, in that also dual prophecy. So as we start to sort of understand that, we move on in there, and I'm just going to watch the clock, make sure I can get this whole answer in before we break. In verse 19 of Isaiah 13, this is the Babylon of old and future that are being described as being destroyed. And so we're going to be told as that moves on that it's going to be the Medes that are going to succeed, and they're the ones that are going to destroy Babylon. They're going to take over and become the Persian sort of empire. But the destruction is destroyed like Sodom and Gomorrah. And even though Babylon is destroyed to a certain degree, it's not completely destroyed at that point in time, and certainly not like Sodom and Gomorrah, as in what comes from heaven in fire and brimstone to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And yet the end times are also going to be like Sodom and Gomorrah, as the book of Luke transitions the days of Noah to the same destruction and sins that happened at Sodom and Gomorrah. So the complete skies darkening, and this destruction didn't hit that level. Would there have been smoke and fire? Yes, but not to this level, and not the same type of destruction. And it also says in 1322 that the time is near and the days will no longer be prolonged for that destruction of Babylon. So as we sort of conjure into all of that, we're going to have in Isaiah, in Jeremiah 51, we have a dual prophecy there that has the destruction of Babylon. But in the book of Revelation, we get the destruction of Babylon at Revelation 14:8 at the beginning of the summary of the last 3.5 years. And that's the Babylon in the New Testament that is being described as being destroyed like Sodom and Gomorrah, as like in the days of Lot. And also we get those details in detail in Revelation 18 of that destruction. And Babylon is destroyed by the rising Antichrist. So Babylon is the one who's sponsoring the king of Babylon. He comes out of Babylon and then into his own empire. And he's the one in Revelation 17 who receives power for 1 hour from the 10 kings to destroy Babylon in Revelation 17. And we get those details in Revelation 18. So in Isaiah 34, this is an end time prophecy, and we know it's an end time prophecy, and I'm going to come back to the beasts here fairly quickly and give you the comparison on that. It says, let the worlds hear that Jehovah's indignation on the world has come, and this is at the end of the last 3.5 years, and that Israel will be delivered, and that the whole world will be delivered into destruction or Armageddon. And of course, this is the time of Jacob's trouble that he will be saved out of. And that's Sarah. That's the Hebrew cognate word for thalipses in the time of the second Exodus, which is the year of the Lord's favor, followed by the year of the Lord's wrath. And so in Isaiah 34:4, you again get heaven scrolling up and the skies going dark and the stars falling. And that's the passages from Revelation 16 and 19 in the year of the Lord's wrath, with the wrath bowls and the Armageddon battle versus just before the midpoint of the last 7 years and Antichrist rising to power at the midpoint, where it's not as strong as a darkening that happens in Armageddon. It's like totally dark. It's a totally different period of time. It's so dark, as the Old Testament describes the time of the Lord's wrath. And Jesus will come out of, Jehovah will come out of Edom or Bozrah, where he starts the wine press before heading to Mount Hermon. And that's in Isaiah 34:5-6. So we're getting all of these end time descriptions versus the end time is still to come in Isaiah 13. And Isaiah 34:7 forward is talking about the brimstone day of vengeance and the year of recompense for Zion. And you have that culmination into the end time year of the Lord's wrath. So now let's just sort of look at the types of creatures that are described in the time of the destruction of Babylon and then in the time of Armageddon. So in Isaiah 13, you have doleful creatures. That's Hebrew oak, and it means a howling or a jackal or a hyena. So kind of almost like an Anubis type of god. Or angel. You have owls, and as that translates back to Hebrew, that's Bath, as in a female or a daughter of, and also Yana, which means essentially unclean animals or an unclean owl. And you also have satyrs that are talked about. These are devil goat gods. And all of these creatures are dancing for joy with the destruction that is coming on the world at the midpoint of the last 7 years just before. Then you have dragons in their palaces, and that's Tanim, which can also mean serpent. Dragon, serpent, that would be a seraphim fallen angel or a watcher. You have wild beasts of the islands. And that is the Hebrew word E, or IY as it would be transliterated. And it means howling beasts again. So howling type of jackal type of gods. And in Isaiah 34, you have similar creatures. So you have, the satyr that is described in Isaiah 34. You also have the great owl, which could also be a serpent owl as it's defined. And one wonders whether or not that's talking about both the cherub bird face and the seraphim look that Satan is described as having in Revelation 12. So in Ezekiel 28, as you roll that all in Isaiah 6 for seraphim. You also have in there, you have these bulls, bullocks of Bashan, as they're described elsewhere in the Bible. And bulls were gods in the Old Testament. So the Baalim gods were bulls. The parent gods before the flood would have been bulls. The Ugaritic gods were called bulls, and the offspring were called bulls, which is why the spurious Nephilim were also described as bulls or bullies. That's where that term comes from. Just as Tyrannos comes from the Gyges kings, as you take that back as them being the original source word for Tyrannos, and they're also Nephilim were called tyrants. You have ravens, cormorants, and owls, again described in some as with owls are the same words that are used in Isaiah 13. Those are bird faces. These are talking about cherubim again. You have dragons and owls. You also have the screech owl, which goes back to Lilith into Hebrew, and a female goddess. You have wild beasts of the island and also wild beasts of the land, and it goes back to the same meanings as beasts in Isaiah 13. So what's going on here? You have all of these fallen angels, and particularly the ones that likely come out of the abyss that are here to destroy the whole world just before the midpoint. They're dancing with the Babylon destruction and everything that's coming along with a third of the whole world being destroyed after 25%. And then these are the same creatures that are shown in Isaiah 34 at the time of Armageddon. And just as we roll in, note that Antichrist, he comes to power as the king of Babylon and transitions into the Assyrian as you get into the latter part of Isaiah 14 when he's called the Assyrian that's going to be killed on the mountains of Israel. And that Antichrist
Listen at Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
We will not comply with the institutions, sick illusion. No, it won't be televised. Welcome to the revolution. We will not comply with the institutions, sick illusion. No, it won't be televised. Welcome to the revolution. They're trying to dumb us down. Don't want us to make us down. We got it down. But it's a revolution.
Revolution.radio, freedomslips.com. Join me at Revolution Radio, Studio B, at 11 a.m. on Saturday for free association, when we take a look at philosophy, spirituality, psychology, social issues, and geopolitics. So every Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern on Studio B at freedomslips.com.
Transcending time and space, let us take you to the place inside your mind where thoughts divide and mysteries unwind. Join us every Monday evening right here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And you will catch the Fenton Perspective with our great host, Lorian Fenton. Come listen in as she shares her amazing stories from the past to present, along with all of her guest secrets to the future. That's the Fenton Perspective every Monday evening right here from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Revolution Radio. Oh, and you don't need to expect us. We're already here. We're already here. We're already here.
If you think for 1 second that the Capitol will ever treat us fairly, you are lying to yourselves. Because we know who they are and what they do. This is what they do, and we must fight back. You can torture us and bomb us. Fire is catching. And if we burn, you burn with us.
Good evening.
Are you awake yet? I hope. We've tried and we've tried for years and years to use passive resistance and loud voices to make a change. But time is over. Your governments around the world have no other goal than to decimate your entire existence at the hands of the bankers and the elites. The war is coming, and it's your choice to decide if you want to be a warrior or a victim. Denial is not a choice anymore. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the planet. Not giving up. Revolution Radio. All right. Thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Shalom, everybody. We're back here after the break. And Brother Gary, did you have any other answer to that amazing answer you gave to the longer question right before the break? Or did you have anything else you wanted to add? Otherwise, I was going to ask the first question for your giveaway. Okay,
I I just want to finish it off. So I was trying to get it in. I wasn't able to. So
you kind of sped up your voice there at the end. That was pretty good.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's what I wanted to do was just sort of link that back into Isaiah 14 just a little bit as the second half to the prophecy and into the second 3.5 years of the prophecy and after the fall of Babylon. You have some interesting markers in there. In Isaiah 14:1, it talks about the Lord or Jehovah is now going to have mercy on Israel and set them in their own land. And this is the time of Jacob's trouble, Micah 37. And the time of trouble is Sarah. That's the time of that Thalipses, the great tribulation. When Michael stands in Revelation 12, the time of trouble, Sarah, the Hebrew word. This is the same time when the war in heaven is taking place at the midpoint of the last 7 years. So these are last 3.5 year events. And that the captives are going to be freed. So that's how we know that Israel captives are part of the second Exodus. And they will then, when this is all played out, they're going to rule over their oppressors. And in verse 3, they're going to be given rest from their hard bondage. And in verse number 4, you have the proverb of Babylon. And remember, Antichrist is rising through Babylon as the king sponsored by the Babylon religion that is going to become the Antichrist. And he's and both the Babylon city and the oppressor will cease. So in the last 3.5 years, that's when all of this plays out, with Babylon being destroyed at the beginning, and then the oppressors, including Antichrist, destroyed at Armageddon. And this is when the staff and the scepter of the wicked will be broken. So again, at Armageddon, as you're moving into the reign of the Antichrist. And that in Isaiah 14:12, just as Satan tried to take his throne into heaven in prehistory, Antichrist, Daniel 8:10, will take his throne into heaven and will try and set it up there, and there'll be a war in heaven. That's the Revelation 12 war. It's at the midpoint when he does that, right after destroying Babylon, that Isaiah 13 was talking about. And so he'll actually bring down some of the starry host and oppress them and trample on them. And then as you move forward in that prophecy to the end, you're going to have Jehovah is going to break the Syrian in the land of the covenant on the mountains there, and in 1425. And in 1429, you get this really interesting serpent's root passage that I talk about in book 2, and that it'll be the rod that smote is now going to be broken, the serpent's root. And also note, as you get into that passage of the serpent's root in 1429, there are some words that are inserted there that aren't in the original Hebrew. So in the land of Palestine, because the rod, and it has that of him that is inserted, smote, the is inserted, then broken is a Hebrew word, and then for out of the serpent's root, for out of the is inserted. So it's basically, if you were to read that from the Hebrew, it's going to be the rod that smote is broken from the serpent's root. And then comes forth a cockatrice, another type of serpent, and its fruit will be a flying serpent, which is a seraphim. So this is the introduction of the seraphim, devil, antichrist relationship, of the worship that's going to be done in the last 3.5 years. So, and you get that same imagery of this flying serpent and dragon in Revelation 12. So I just wanted to sort of connect some of those dots. It's such an important chronological passage that fits perfectly with the New Testament and the Old Testament. And we get all of these angelic beings, of which I described the angelic order in book 2, that are dancing. These are the fallen ones, the Nephilim, that are celebrating with the destruction at the time of Babylon in the days of the trumpet, and then again at the destruction of the whole world that they're trying to bring about, except that Jesus steps in to prevent all life from being killed at the time of Armageddon. So very important passage, and those creatures are the fallen angels, some of which come out of the abyss.
You know, I wanted to comment real quick when you mentioned the Hebrew word meaning islands, when part of the question was about the beasts of the islands. I'm not sure if we talked about this before, Gary, but the word Hawaii ends with that E sound, and it's actually a Hebrew word as well. If you pronounce it the way the Hawaiians pronounce it, Hawaii, the first part of that is Hava, and the last part is E. And as we know, Hava is another name for Eve, right? And which means life giver. And so they're like life-giving islands, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd like to do a question for all of those in the chat and everyone listening. Which book would you like to give away first? Your first
choice. Your choice.
Okay. Let's do this for your first book. This is for Gary's first book, not the one that is just recently published, but for the one that's been out for, has it been almost a decade now, Gary, or a little bit less?
I think 8 years. Yeah.
8 years. Okay, so this is for this giveaway is for the Genesis 6 Conspiracy. This is Gary's first published book, and you can listen to this question when you have the answer. If you are the first one to type it into the chat correctly, I would like to have correct spelling as well, so we know for sure who you mean. It's just a one-word answer, and if you guys are ready, here's the question. Who of the 12 spies from the tribes of Israel going into Canaan is mentioned in Joshua 14, verse 14, as the son of a Kenizzite? And the question is, who of the 12 spies from the tribes of Israel going into Canaan is mentioned in Joshua 14, verse 14, as a son of a Kenizzite? So I'm going to take for a little bit for you guys' answer, and I'll be watching the chat. And this is also mentioned in Gary's book in chapter 26. He's got like an entire chapter dedicated to this topic, right, Gary?
Yep, I do.
Okay. Okay. So, and it looks like we have a winner. And yes, I'm going to take your answer, even though it's not spelled correctly the English way, it is spelled correctly the Hebrew way. So Sherry Papin, congratulations, you got it. It is Caleb. And very good. So Sherry Papin, if you can send either, I'm trying to remember how this works. You could send an email to Sacred Word Publishing LLC@gmail.com, and then Justin will forward your answer and your address to Gary. Is that how it usually works, Gary? I'm trying to remember here.
Yeah,
and,
usually I get the addresses from you, and then I mail it out directly.
Okay, yes. So Sherry, go ahead and do that. Congratulations. It looks like a whole bunch of people got it correct after you did, Sherry. You guys are on it. I'm so impressed. You know, actually, I think I should ask the second question now, because I know once you get on a roll here, Gary, it's kind of hard to stop, and I don't want to run into the end of the hour and then we're trying to give away your second book. So if that's okay with you, I'm going to go ahead and ask the second question.
Yeah, go ahead. Yep.
Okay, everybody in the chat, get ready. This is question 2, and this is for Gary's brand new book that was just published. And here is the question. In the book of Job, which of his friends who visited him was also the eldest son of Esau and the father of Amalek? And that's the question is, in the book of Job, which of his friends who visited him was also the eldest son of Esau and the father of Amalek? Okay. And while they're answering this, it looks like Sherry wants to give, she already has your book, Gary. So the next person who answered that correctly was Jason and Jessica Miller. So congratulations to you guys for the first book, the first question. Thank you, Sherry, for passing that on. And Jason and Jessica, please send an email with your address and saying that you won Gary's first book to Sacred Word Publishing LLC@gmail.com. Congratulations, you guys. Okay, and oh my goodness, just as I said their name, Jason and Jessica Miller, they got the second one correct. It was Eliphaz. Excellent, good job, you guys. Jason and Jessica, it looks like you got both of the questions correct. If you already have one of Gary's books, or if you want to pass this on to the next person, actually Sherry was the next person, so it's between both of you. Maybe you could talk here in the chat and figure out which one you guys have. I think Sherry's got the first one. She'd probably prefer the second one. So I want you guys could talk in the chat, but the winners are Sherry Papin and Jason and Jessica Miller. Congratulations, you guys. And thank you so much, Gary, for making those books available. Would you like to, I think we'll wait till the end of the show and you can give your information one more time for people to order your brand new book, or if they haven't gotten your first book yet, information on that. But as for now, we will go on to the next question. Are you ready, Gary?
I am.
Okay. This question says, okay, Gary has read the Book of Mormon during research, and we're aware of that. What do you think the origin of the Book of Mormon is? And then it looks like it's a two-part question. This is from Yorkshire Rose. Is there connections to the Illuminati with Joseph Smith or the LDS Church?
Yeah, good question. So I like to be careful when I'm talking about various sections of Christianity, and I know some people don't look at Mormonism as part of Christianity, but it's classified in there. And I think, the people at the lower levels are great people. I question the leadership and what they're really sort of teaching within some of the doctrines and additions to the Bible that they have, but that's just my opinion. But so it's the adept level and higher that I get concerned with in the church, and the ability to change scripture as they feel that they have the authority to do, as opposed to the people who are studying the Bible within the Mormon Church. And so what we do know is Smith was Freemason. There were a number of Freemasons that were starting Mormonism, and Mormonism, and as the scripture came down, it was like it was being dictated from like a demonic spirit, or I guess as the Mormons would look at it, more as a maybe an angel providing it, but it's not really the same way as you would get in the Bible. So I think we want to be careful of everything that's in the edition, because we can't really get veracity to the sourcing of it, as is that a good spirit or an evil spirit. So, and also in Masonry, you have the bloodlines, and the bloodlines of the giants and of the demigods, and you have to be part of the bloodlines to be invited to become a Mason. And certainly at the adept level, at some of that knowledge, you're going to have the Illuminati that would be in the mix here. And just as the Illuminati is slightly higher than Masonry in the degrees and sort of merged in the 1770s, you still have a distinct group, but they're the adepts that are operating even at the higher level and the first level of adepts. So interesting sort of connection in terms of the reception in a trance state and the dictating of what came down. And then as you look at the people of Mormon, in terms of what's in the book of Mormon, and you have, the Nephi, which is a interesting term that is inexplicably close to Nephilim, Nephi. And I don't have a Hebrew word that is just great Nephi, but there's just an eerie sort of connection there, and that you have a lot of the names that would be connected with a tribe, personal names would end in that type of word. As a Nephi would normally end as a name, or a patronymic name received eponymously from the tribe in an IY. So that would be pronounced Nephi. And just as you have a source word that is coming out of I, you'll have another word that is IYSH, which would be a champion. And so you get these, well, are they talking about, giant bloodlines here from Nephi, because there's this bloodline that is talked about, that's coming out kind of from prehistory, after the flood versus before the flood, as with Nephilim. But of course, we have giants like the Rephaim after the flood. And then you have these patriarchs that are talked about in there that seem to have giant names or giant association amongst these names. And typically, a giant was a patriarch for specific tribes. And I talk about this in great detail and name tribes in book 2. So in the Book of Mormon, Nephi and his people are associated circa 600 BC at the time of the Babylonian destruction, and their bloodline as descendants were associated with a people by the name of Jared as the first people of their tribe, so to speak, and nation. And it dates back in their writings there to the time of Babel and Nimrod by inheriting something called the Jaredite records or plates, and were custodians of this knowledge. And there was a lot of knowledge that was going on at Babylon or at Babel, according to polytheist Gnostics and Freemasons, that was the antediluvian sciences. And so watchers, both visible and invisible, were guardians of this knowledge. And I talk about this in great length in book 1 about this ancient knowledge. And seemingly that's part of the legacy of the Nephi, who take their roots back to the Jaredite people after, with the dispersion of Babel and the knowledge that went with it. And then in the book of Ether, E-T-H-E-R, if I've pronounced that right, or Ether, Jared's an unnamed brother, was a mighty man, as in Gibberim, and associated with giants and favored before the Lord, and that's in Ether 134. And Joseph Smith named him as Marani or Morian Coomer, depending on which version of how he named them that you're reading. But you don't get that name in the Book of Mormon. And you get, an association as the same type of descriptions as being this, as Nimrod, because this guy was this unnamed brother was a mighty man, highly favored before the Lord, just as Nimrod was a mighty man before God in Genesis 10. And later on in Book of Ether, you get large and mighty men. So now Gibberim and large, so giants, and as compared to humans, and they're mentioned in 1526. So they get this continual association with the giants. And then Helaman 115 discusses a giant named Corian Tumur, who was also a mighty man, and noting that he's part of another tribe that came across to America around the same time, but maybe a few years different, but within a decade. They're called the Zeramaletes, and they came across and become associated with the Nephite people or the Nephite people because the Nephite capital was in their land. So they're very much associated with people. And again, those connections to the giants. So you don't get a direct bloodline, but you get all of this information with the bloodlines, which the Masons take as gospel in terms of their genealogies. So there's a connection there. And so one should test all of the teachings if you're a Christian against what the Bible says, and wherever it starts to depart, you should be aware of that. But I will not speak against Mormons because the people are very, very good people there, and they're not, the flock isn't part of the adept group, so they're not getting told the whole truth, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree, Gary. It seems like it's like I have Mormon friends, and it seems like, as in with many of the 501c3 churches, it's the leadership that is the corrupt part of it. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, because it's an adept level. It goes into polytheism, and that's where all the changes to doctrine happen, and that's where you get the changes in meanings in terms of things that they're teaching at the lower levels, because the lower levels aren't considered worthy enough in secret societies to understand the true meaning.
Yeah, I also think it's kind of ironic you mentioned the name. You always see on Mormon temples or churches the spire, and they often have that angel Moroni or Moroni or however you pronounce that. I always think it's kind of interesting that you take away the I and it's moron. I was wondering if that might be the source of that word, or it just seems like it's extremely close to that.
I've not done a search on that, so I can't
It just
comment.
came to my mind. I just thought it was a little comical. But anyway, let's go on to your next question. Thank you again for that very in-depth answer. And here's your next question. This is from Russell Eads. Is it okay to use your books as a study guide in church?
Yeah, I do, because certainly anything that I'm referencing, as I measure everything back in book one against the Bible, it's the information coming out of the Bible. So yeah, I think there's a lot of good things that you can take in there for teaching, particularly on prehistory and giants. I would say for Christians, though, particularly in teaching in the church, book 2 is going to be the book that you want to do that. It's just loaded with it, and it's so detailed, and it's directed at Christians. So, in terms of, if you want to be talking in detail about the different tribes of the giants, not only do I cover off the Anakim and the Rephaim and the standard ones like the Zuzim, the Zamzuzim, the Emim, the Horim, all the ones that are talked in the Avim that are talked about in Deuteronomy 2, but I'm going to go in and take all of these tribes back to patriarchs, that the tribes were eponymously named after that particular patriarch. So you're going to get the Perazim, you're going to get the Geshurim, the Gerzim, the Makathim, the Gebalim, the Kenazim, the Kenim, the Cadmonim, the Cherathim, the Caphtorim, the Casualhim, and you're going to get more, just to give you a list of the giants. I'm going to cover off all of the giant wars that are covered in the Bible in each of the campaigns.
Wow.
And I'm going to cover off those wars throughout the Judges, and how they're talking about giants in the wars of the Judges, and right through to King Saul, King David, and King Solomon, right down to the Hadad bloodline dynasties. And so if you want to talk about the angelic hierarchy, I've got that in the book. If you want to, it's just look at the table of contents, and you're just going to know that is going to go back, and you're going to get the Hebrew and the Greek words to go along with everything that I'm teaching in there, and you can check the veracity for yourself, because it's all there.
Oh my goodness, I can't wait to get my copy, Gary. You should see your first book. I actually brought your book along with me on this trip that my husband and I are at in Wisconsin, and we've been teaching and helping out with Bible studies here. And I actually, along the same lines of this question, I used your book to teach about all the other details about the War of the Four Kings against Five, which you have a chapter on. So I really appreciate your information. Thank you so much.
Well, and in book 2, in the War of Four Kings Against Five, I come at it in a way that is just explosive in the amount of information that I add to that.
Oh, I'm so excited. Oh my gosh, I have to get my copy. Okay, let's go on to your next question. This is from Quick66. What do you think about we are living in the short season after the Tartarian millennium of Jesus? And this seems to be like a really kind of a hot topic. I'd like to hear your opinion on this too, Gary.
Yeah, it's preterism is where that comes out of in eschatology, and it's kind of a new form of more preterism, and there's multiple different formats, but it's kind of mixed in with the Tartarian sort of understanding. So I'm not a fan of taking things out of context with what's written in the Bible, and that little season is taken right out of context, and it's expanded into this more version that there's like 200, 300, 400 years, 1,000 years, depending on who you're talking to, and it changes it depending on who I'm talking to on it. That we're living in this period that's a short period that is somehow hundreds and hundreds of years long, where everything was wiped out, and the memory of what was the end time, Armageddon, all of our history was absolutely wiped out, and it's the time when Satan is ruling the earth for this period of time. So I'm a fan of letting the Bible define itself, and I'm a fan of trying to get to the heart of the meanings, and I don't buy the little season as it's argued in this sort of Tartarian preterist type of argument. So this word little season, or short season as some people like to call it, little is the Greek word micros, and season is chronos. And these words have specific sort of meanings. So you have this word season or chronos, which is can be used as a season or can be a general period of time, long and short. So you have to sort of look at the application and see how it's being used. And so it's that word, that is put in front of it, little or micros, that sort of defines it. And I'm going to come back to this in a second. But, the word micros, it really means least, less, little, small. It doesn't mean large. It's not a large season. It is a very sort of short period of time. And we get one other passage where you get that identical wording, both in Greek and in English, of the little season, and that happens in Revelation 6, where the martyred saints, those who hold the testimony to Jesus and were slain for it, are at the throne, and they're told to wait a little while until martyrs like them come out of the great tribulation, and they're told to wait for a little season. So even if you took the only other passage in the Bible that talks about a little season, it would be it wouldn't be any longer than 3.5 years for the first half of that affliction and tribulation, that the saint tribulations come out that are shown in Revelation 7 at the midpoint of the last 7 years, the last of the first fruits being the 144,000 in heaven. So I kind of struggle with that. And then secondly, a season can be defined long or short, yes, but when it's described as little, you need to understand it sort of literally that way. And it can also just mean 3 months. But again, because of Revelation 6, I'm open to a little longer. I'm open to as maybe the most of 3.5 years. Now, we do get that word season or chronos that is used elsewhere in the New Testament. And we get another word that's associated with it afterwards. So that word is used for long time in Matthew 25:19. And so long means obviously more than short, right? It's a longer period of time. And we also get that same type of language of a long season or a long time, and it can be translated either way into the New Testament. In Acts 8:11, 14:3, and 28, and 2 Peter 2:3. So when that application biblically is used, and it's going to mean maybe slightly different than what a normal season would be, then we get these descriptive words that go with it. And so even though you can use time as a year, this is again showing that it may be shorter or maybe a little bit longer, and you have to look at the context of it. Now, Greek words have cognate Hebrew words, and it's unfortunate we don't have the New Testament in a Hebrew format, because you could take the words sort of directly. But just as Thalipses has a cognate word of sarah in Hebrew for time of trouble or tribulation, so does chronos. And that's the Hebrew word et, ETH, as it's transliterated, meaning a time as in a year, or a time of an event, or as in a time that brings forth a season. So in Psalms 1:4, it says a tree brings forth fruit in its season, typically understood as 3 months. So as we look at the meanings, we have to look at the verse that it's in the passages that are elsewhere in the Bible and what the meanings are, and make sure we define it properly and that it's not inconsistent or in contradiction. And so as we get into that sort of argument, then the preterist argument seems to be, well, if everything was destroyed with mudslides and everything else, you wouldn't have a memory of anything. And so I'm going, well, when did this happen? And as you say, you get these varying sort of ages. Well, you know, even my own family history. I mean, my father was born in 1915, and the history wasn't lost. And he has had the history of his family, you know, going back and coming from Ireland and England before that, and they had that history with it, and they weren't provided that history. They didn't give it to. That's what they took with them to the New World. So I go for a simpler sort of approach. I don't try and reinvent what it says, but it has to fit perfectly. And I put everything around what Jesus said. And we don't have any prophecy for this great loss of knowledge. And so in Revelation 16, you have the gathering of the armies, which takes less than a year to Armageddon. Why would it take Satan a millennia or hundreds of years to gather the armies to Jerusalem to have the battle? It makes no sense. So again, people should decide what they believe and dig into things. And all I try and do is say, hey, if I can't make it fit, I just simply can't make a preterist view fit biblically without leaving out passages or without contradiction. So I agree to disagree fundamentally with it, but I respect that people have other different views on eschatology.
Yes, I agree, Gary. Thank you for that answer. I think it's important for people to do their own research, and like you said, if you can't make it fit, you can't try to force things into the Bible that are not there. So I agree. Okay, next question from John Zimmer. How are the blood types tied to Psalm 21, verse 8 to 11?
Yeah, another very, very good question. So, and if people haven't read, Psalms 21, 9 through 11, people ought to read that, because a lot of people think that bloodlines aren't talked about in the Bible. It's talked about in a lot of ways, like the royals and seed lines and things like that, and dynasties. But, in Psalms 21, 9, it's in the time of the wrath and the anger of the last year. That's the time when Jehovah is going to, Yahweh, Jehovah, Old Hebrew, Newer Hebrew, will swallow this bloodline up in his wrath, so that people know, and the fire shall devour them. And it says that their fruit, shall he destroy from the earth, and their seed from amongst the children of men. So there's a bloodline there that we're fighting against. These are the visible ones. And so the question, is how are the blood types typed to that? Well, we're talking about a seed line or a bloodline, and there's different kinds of blood types. And this is the same sort of seed line that I think, begins in Genesis 3:15, which is that seed of the serpent. It's a curse and a prophecy, a special type of prophecy. I think it's fulfilled in Genesis 6. And these are the terrible ones that are going to be destroyed in Isaiah 25 as a branch of the terrible ones. They're a team, as I call them, that are described in Ezekiel 32 on a mountain in the end time. So there's this bloodline that's going to be dealt with, just as we also talked about Daniel 2:43 and the commingling of the beast empire bloodlines with humans in the end time. So there is this bloodline that we need to sort of account for. And so how do the blood types sort of intermix with that? Well, I kind of think the Rh negative is the addition to the bloodline of humanity, and that the issue gets to be with that is the understanding is that you're missing the D antigen, and that you can't add something that's missing. But that's when you look at the blood type. It's not the blood type that's passed on, it's the gene that's passed on, and typically passed on in the occult through the female branch line, and particularly as that's important to start a new dynasty, that Rh negative is going to be transmitted through from a matriarchal fairy owl allegorical perspective versus the dragon or the raven bloodlines from the patriarchal perspective. And the reason why that's really important is that it's the genes that produce the blood type. And once you understand that blood types can actually skip a generation depending on the gene mix, it starts to make sense that it's the gene that's added, not the Rh negative, that the Rh negative is a manifestation of the gene. And within the occult realm, you have these things called a gens that goes back to a specific patriarch. So I talk about in book 1 the LB gens, and LB means, hoary, as in Horim. Horim is related to, as in pale white, as in Blanche. It's all words dealing with white, and gens meaning a specific patriarch that a bloodline of will take their ancestry back to a specific patriarch. And in this case, LB gens is a pale white patriarch, and probably a word like LB or Albion, and I cover that off in book 2 as well, with more detail. And there's the Julia gens, for example, that's the black nobility in Italy that take their bloodlines back through. This is the older black nobility versus the newer black nobility of the merchants and bankers like the Medicis that moved to Venice and Florence and places like that in around 1000 AD. That's the junior Phoenician black nobility versus the older black nobility that takes their bloodlines back through Caesar, Augustus, to the senators, back to Romulus and Remus, and the celestial mafia godfathers who created Romulus and Remus. In this you have that's also known as the fairy gens in the occult, the elven gens, as in the elven bloodline of the Tuatha De Danann, and the dragon and matriarchal fairy bloodline of the coming Messiah, as I cover off in book 1. And you also have a term that they look at it coming from a specific line of female goddess, as in starting a dynasty, as in the gene of Isis, a post-diluvian queen of heaven matriarch. And that's the generic term throughout the occult is the gene of Isis. That's that spark of the divine that they're looking for, or that 1,000 points of light that they want to unite in the end time. So get at the understanding of the blood types and the Rh negative through the genes, and that most of the royales have Rh negative blood, with the Windsors having OH negative, but not all of them are OH negative, but all 4 types are, in addition to the positive type of bloods that were before. And we know that Rh negative was added somehow, some way into the human pool at some point in time that science seemingly can't figure out when, but seemingly goes back to the creation of the giants, both before and after the flood.
Wow, I really appreciate all your information in your first book about the bloodlines. That really opened my eyes up to a lot. And just hearing you add on to it is just amazing. Thank you, Gary. Okay, let's do the next question. This is from The Lamb is the Light. If we are the generation that may be caught up in the air, why would Yah have chosen us of all people?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So this is, if we are indeed part of the fig tree generation, then, as Matthew 24 talks about, then there is a specific generation, and in that generation will be the ones that will be caught up in the air. And why? What's so special about us in this generation? Well, it's because it's the rise of the 7th empire and then the 8th empire of Antichrist. And it's going to be the most powerful empire not seen since before the flood.
Wow.
When a similar thing that happened. And this is the godless generation that we're going to be living amongst, that's described in 2 Timothy 1-9. And by the midpoint of the last 7 years, and saved from the hour of trial, then this is the time that at the end of those first 3.5 years, that the two witnesses and the 144,000, the last of the first fruits and the last of the first fruits martyred in the first 3.5 years are taken to heaven. And at that time, those who sleep and those who are still alive will be raptured, because that's the time of great tribulation, not ever seen since before creation, before and even before the flood. I mean, nothing that is happening in these last 7 years, and more so in the last 3.5 years, has been seen since creation. This is very much reminiscence of a timing for destruction unlike anything seen since the angelic rebellion, and a destruction by fire that I think 2 Peter 3 is referencing to. But that's another sort of rabbit hole. And in this time of this godless generation, there will be martyrs up to the time of the last 7 years, and then the first 3.5 years that are going to be part of those first fruits who died for the testimony of Jesus and talked truth to power, unlike has been seen since the time of the early Christians. And even more so, I think, so much so that the Holy Spirit will bolster some who are speaking truth to power at that time, and they will be martyred en masse for that testimony. And in such overwhelming evil hegemony and persecution and slaughter, the Christians will stand tall with their testimony, not only with what they say, but what they do, and will earn a special place for those who survive all of that, who haven't been killed and resurrected as first fruits in Revelation 7. Those who hung to that truth and testimony under fire will be resurrected. And then those who were left that were not as strong in their faith, but Christians nonetheless, or those who are going to convert quickly because they recognize the times and the mark of the beast, they're going to have to earn their resurrection through fire as well, but even more so because it's part of the great tribulation that's not been seen since creation. So that's why, if this is indeed the fig tree generation, the challenge will be stronger than anything seen since the flood, and even before that.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much for that, Gary. I think this next question is really pertinent just because it's describing something happening next month. This is from Benjamin Curry. Can you comment on the Aleph Tav eclipse coming April 8th?
Yeah, it's interesting. So what it's talking about is a series of 3 eclipses, one from 2017, one from 2023, and one from 2024. So it's kind of amalgamating those 3 eclipses. And when you do the path of that eclipse, it's said that it's going to create the Aleph Tav sign in letters of original Hebrew. And so I don't know whether I would go sort of that far to say that that would be one of the signs, because it's not one that would be sort of obvious. But it'd be interesting if that's actually the case, and I haven't done any work to try and prove whether or not both the combination of those 3 would trace out the 2 Hebrew letters, Aleph and Tav. Tav is the last of the alphabet in Hebrew, and Aleph is the first. And it's generally sort of kind of understood by some, and I think there's something to this, is that when it's saying Aleph Tav, that is the Greek cognate of Alpha Omega, with Omega being the last letter in the Greek alphabet. And the Alpha Omega is also applied not only to the Father El Elyon, God Most High, but also to Jesus as Alpha Omega and as the Word. And so as the Word, as the beginning of the end, and everything that He provides is the word Logos of the Theos, Jehovah of the Elohim. And it's interesting in Genesis 1:1, for example, and there's other examples throughout the book where you have where God is creating the earth, where it says God, and then the next word after that is creating. You have another word that's sort of inserted there that is kind of unusual. So it goes Elohim Eth, and we talked about Eth as a time before, and that forms in that joining of those two words together is you have the alpha and the tav as being as when God created the earth, and inserting the word in there in that kind of meaning. So I have a lot of respect for that type of association, and that it would otherwise be inexplicable why you would have F in the original Hebrew there unless it was trying to communicate something more. And I think that's the word of God that would come out when God said, as in he speaks in the days of creation. That's the Hebrew word amar, which is speech, which is basically words, right? So that's the God commands things to be created, and the word creates it, just as the word created all things in John 1 at the commandment of God, and in Colossians 1. So everything is sort of in perfection there. But whether or not this is one of those signs of the end time where it takes almost like an astrology type of thing to sort of put that together, that's maybe a leap too far for me. But I do recognize the significance of signs in the skies as we get closer to the end time. I don't know whether this is one of them, but it is certainly interesting to look at.
Okay, thank you so much, Gary. Next question is from Sea of Glass. Is the clay kingdom where Adam was formed?
I think this is kind of referencing to Daniel 2, 41 to 42, if I understand the question right. So generically, yes. Specifically, no. So in Daniel 2, 41 and 42, you have words like pottery, clay, miry clay, clay. They all go back to things that humankind would be made of, just as Adam would also be going back to red earth and clay as being molded from as the creation of the Adamites. But the min there is Enosh, as in a mortal human, and kind of understood in Hebrew as a less sort of or lower or not as important type of human, if I could put it that way, a distinction, versus the word Adam for human, which would be considered at a little bit higher level, but in a religious sort of notion, as in the holy seed. So this seems to be more of a Gentile denomination as it's used in that application there. So yeah, there's a kingdom of either lower level bloodlines that these metallic empire kings are going to be mixing their seed with, and or humans or strong men for these 10 kings of the end time that are on 2 feet, the 10 toes on the 2 feet. And it's an iron, it's not a fully metallic empire as the iron one is in the old Roman. This is a mix of iron and clay. So I think that's definitely representing some form of intermixing and ruling of lower bloodlines, have additional human bloodlines within the mix, and or maybe pure humans that are like strongmen. So, let's say Putin doesn't prove to have a royal bloodline that he says he might be, if we were in the last 7 years, considered one of those strongmen, but he also could be considered as part of the bloodlines, at least as he asserts. So, yeah, I would look at it in that sort of ways, but just kind of separate it from the Adamites to more of the Gentiles in the understanding there.
Oh, very interesting. Very interesting. Okay, next question. This is from Faith into the Eternal. Does the scripture, he who is in me is greater than he who is in the world, the Holy Spirit?
Yeah, I think I would sort of look at it that way. So just as, Jesus is the Word and God with us as the Word, God physically wasn't there. I mean, Jesus was praying to the Father who was in heaven, and Jesus goes back to sit at the right hand of the Father. So in John 4:4, that I think is being referred to here by Faith into the Eternal, 1 John 4:4, if people are looking for the passage, it says in verse 6 that we are of God, of Theos, and that, we're going to have a testimony of that spirit in us, and the spirit of truth, as it goes on to say. And that's the pneuma, Greek word pneuma, which is the cognate word for ruach in Hebrew, and that would be the Holy Spirit. So, and we know the Holy Spirit was sent to us, and we would have the Spirit of God in us as through the Holy Spirit, and Jesus in us as well. So I think in this use that it is God's Spirit that's being referenced as you put all of the verses together there.
Okay, I think we can squeeze in hopefully one more. This is another one from Daniel Sullivan. What Bible verses show that Judah is the fig tree and that Israel is the vine?
Yeah, so a lot of the two major ones are in Jeremiah 24, 1 to 10, two baskets of figs which are good and evil. This is the southern kingdom in the time of Babylon and that apocalypse. And in Isaiah 5, 1 through 7, it has the vineyard or the garden of God, and Israel is the vine in the vineyard, and Judah is something different, is the pleasant plant, as in the fig tree. And so we get more passages in there about the vine and the fig tree, one being for the northern kingdom and one being for the southern kingdom. So 1 Kings 4:25. Where Judah and Israel dwell under his vine and his fig tree, from Dan to Beersheba, and this was in the time of Solomon under one kingdom, and it's still denoting the two kingdoms there. And you also have in Isaiah 34, for example, in the time of the wrath that we talked about earlier, the hosts are going to fall like the vine and the fig tree. Again, of an angelic sort of form of the visible ones that are talked about in terms of Israel as being the vine and Judah as being the fig tree, and that each of Israel in Isaiah 36 will eat of his vine and of the fig tree until God comes to take them away, and from the land. And also in Jeremiah 5, you're talking about the war and the armies, and they're going to eat of the vines and the fig trees, and that at that time Judah is going to serve the stronger house. And so you have a delineation again of the northern and the southern tribes there as well. So when Jesus is talking about killing that fig tree in Matthew 21:18, because it's bearing no fruit, that's the fig tree that comes back to life, as he uses in Matthew 24 and Mark 11.
Great. Thank you so much, Gary. We have about 1 minute left, so we have one question left. I think we'll save that for next time, so you can give your information one more time about where to order your book, how to contact you. And we thank you all for participating in the chat. We look forward to another wonderful Ask Me Anything session with Gary next month. So Gary, can you give your information one more time, and then we're going to close?
Yes, the best way to get hold of me or to get hold of my book is through the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis6, the number 6conspiracy.com. And on that website, there is a place to contact the author and about the author. And when you see the contact the author, that's my email, Genesis6conspiracy@gmail.com with the number 6. So if you want to get some more information on what we're talking about, ask me a question, get a hold of me through there. And you can also purchase a copy from the website for book 1 or book 2. And there's a page for Canada, there's a page for the US, and there's a page for the rest of the world. And you can also link over to Amazon.com, Amazon.ca, BarnesandNoble.com, and to the Kindle edition.
All right. Thank you so much, Gary. Another wonderful show, and we look forward to next month. If you guys have questions you have for Gary, you can email to him. You can email to Sacred Word Publishing LLC@gmail.com, and we'll try to cover some more next month. Thank you so much, Gary. Everyone have a wonderful night.
Night.
Blessings.